Sometimes, the greatest stories begin with a single step into the shadows. In a quiet village nestled between ancient hills, a young storyteller named Alara made a choice that would change everything. She decided to defy the elders and venture into the forbidden Whispering Woods, a place where the trees themselves murmur with forgotten secrets. Her goal was to find the lost Sunstone of the Ethel, an artifact whispered to hold the true, unvarnished history of a civilization that vanished from the world. By the way, I am curious about where you are listening from and what the local time is for you right now. It is always wonderful to feel our community stretching across the globe. Alara believed the old legends were more than just bedtime tales to soothe children. She was risking her standing in the community and her own safety to uncover a truth that everyone else seemed to fear. The weight of that choice hung in the air as she took her first, determined step into the unknown. By the end of this journey, you will discover how a single act of courage can rewrite the history we think we know. What secrets lie buried in the legends we tell ourselves? The air grew thick with the sound of rustling leaves and fragmented words. Each step Alara took into the Whispering Woods was a battle against a living maze. The gnarled roots twisted underfoot, rising up like tripwires, while the overlapping whispers from the canopy seemed designed to confuse and frighten her. One voice murmured of a pit to the west, another sang of quicksand to the east. She closed her eyes for a moment, shutting out the visual deception, and focused instead on the cadence of the stories she had learned by heart. Her grandmother's tales spoke of a truth hidden within a rhythm, a pattern in the chaos. She matched her breathing to that rhythm, and the whispers began to sort themselves, the lies falling away until only one path, lined with softly glowing moss, felt right. It led her directly to the base of an immense, ancient oak, its bark carved with symbols that pulsed with a faint light. A deep, resonant voice, not heard but felt in her bones, posed a challenge. It did not ask for a fact, but for a meaning. It spoke of a crown that was never worn, and a king who ruled only in stories. Alara's mind raced. This was not history from a scroll. It was lore from a lullaby. She answered softly, speaking of a leader who chose wisdom over power, whose true crown was the legacy of peace he left behind. A profound silence fell. Then, with a groan of shifting wood, the oak's massive roots slowly sank into the earth, clearing the way. But in that silence, she felt a new presence, a sensation of being watched by something old and utterly still. The woods were not just a maze, they were a guard, and she had just tripped an unseen wire. Pushing forward, the trees began to thin, their whispers fading into a tense quiet. She stepped out from the final shadow of the canopy, and the breath caught in her throat. An endless sea of pale sand stretched to the horizon, and there, stark against the bleached sky, stood the first colossal remnant of the Ethel, a silent sentinel waiting in the desert. Before her, the ruins of the Ethel were not just stone, they were a promise of shade, but the desert had other plans. The air shimmered with a heat that stole the breath from her lungs, and the sands shifted under her feet with every step. It was a disorienting, thirsty trek that stretched for what felt like an eternity, until a faint shimmer of green on the horizon offered a fragile hope. She pushed toward it, her vision blurring, only to find a scene of quiet demise. It was a sunken oasis, a bowl of vibrant life nestled within the dunes, but its turquoise waters were pulling back from the shore, as if a great plug had been pulled from the earth. The receding water unveiled what had been hidden for ages, a wide, circular staircase, carved from white stone, descending into the depths. At the bottom, submerged in the center of the shrinking pool, a dark pedestal held a disk of what looked like pale, polished bone. A star map. She knew it was the key. There was no time for hesitation. Alara plunged into the water, the sudden cool a shock to her parched skin. She dove down, fighting the murky sediment stirred up by the vanishing water. Her fingers closed around the cold, smooth disk, just as the water level dropped dramatically, leaving her standing on wet stone, the oasis now little more than a muddy puddle. Her action had sealed its fate. The map felt inert in her hands, its surface etched with lines and symbols that seemed to writhe and shift when she tried to focus on them. It was a lock without a key. Desperation clawed at her, the heat and thirst making her lightheaded. A half-remembered story surfaced in her mind, a tale of truth written in life. With a sharp stone, she nicked her palm, a single drop of blood welling up. It was a desperate gamble. She pressed her hand to the map's center. The bone disc warmed instantly, drinking the offering. The chaotic symbols snapped into sharp, stable clarity, and the entire map began to emit a soft, unwavering golden light. For a moment, she felt a surge of triumph. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the map's glow became a brilliant beacon in the twilight, a signal she had never meant to send. And on the distant dunes, pinpricks of orange light flickered to life. Campfires, her solitude was over. The pinpricks of orange light quickly resolved into a ring of watchful figures, their faces hardened by the desert sun. They did not speak, but their silence was a wall. At their center stood their chieftain, a man named Rockin, whose eyes held the cold assessment of a hawk. He saw the glowing map in her hand, and his expression darkened, his warriors tightening their circle. Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She had no weapons, no strength left for a fight. Her only tool was the truth, or at least the story of it. She did not plead or explain. Instead, she took a slow breath and began to speak. Her voice, though tired, carried the rhythm of the old tales. She wove the legend of the Ethel's fall, not as a dry history, but as a living tapestry. She spoke of their pride, their great cities that brushed the clouds, and the slow, quiet fading that followed, a civilization not conquered by an enemy, but undone by forgetting its own heart. She described the final, sorrowful king who chose to dissolve his own crown into starlight rather than see his people fight over its empty symbol. She made them feel the chilling silence of a throne room left forever empty. As she spoke, she saw the change. The warriors' grips on their spears loosened. Rockin's stern gaze did not soften, but it deepened, shifting from suspicion to a grim, reluctant recognition. He heard the truth in her cadence. "You do not seek a treasure," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You seek a ghost, and ghosts make for poor plunder." His alliance, however, was a cautious gift. While Rockin granted her the tribe's protection for the journey ahead, his second, a younger man named Kale, watched with undisguised contempt. He saw not a storyteller, but a thief of attention and a disruptor of their ways. Every question Alara answered, every step she took, was under Kale's hostile gaze, his silence a constant challenge. The social landscape of the tribe was now a treacherous path she had to walk with care. Knowing that trust demanded risk, Ilara made a choice. Before the assembled elders, she placed the glowing star map into Rockin's weathered hands. It was her only guide, her only key. To give it up was to potentially lose everything, but the gesture was a language the chieftain understood. He studied the artifact, then her face, and gave a slow, single nod. The alliance was sealed, but the cost was a new, internal enemy. Kale's descent was a crack in their foundation, a promise of conflict yet to come. With the map returned to her, Rockin turned and pointed toward the jagged horizon. There, piercing the sky, was a mountain peak unlike any other. It was crowned not with snow, but with a shimmering, silent aurora, a veil of ethereal light that danced in colors unseen in any desert sky. "That is the Spire of Dawn," he said, "and the light you see is the celestial gate, waiting." The ascent up the Spire of Dawn was a trial of sheer endurance. Jagged rock tore at their hands, and the thin, cold air burned in their lungs. Rockin's tribe moved with a practiced grace, finding holds where Ilara saw only a sheer face. For hours they climbed, the silent, shimmering aurora growing ever larger above them, until they finally hauled themselves onto a windswept ledge. There it stood, a massive archway of black stone, its surface intricately carved with constellations that seemed to writhe and swim. Set within the arch were 3 perfect orbs of crystal, dull and dormant. The star map in Ilara's hand flared with light, its etched lines mirroring the patterns on the arch, and the true stars just beginning to appear in the twilight sky. This was not a lock to be forced, but a song to be harmonized. She had to turn the orbs, aligning them with 3 specific constellations as they reached their zenith overhead. The first, the serpent, slid into place with a deep chime. The second, the lyre, followed as its stars brightened directly above. But the third constellation, the crown, was slow to rise. The timing was agonizingly precise. As the first star of the crown finally touched the apex of the sky, Ilara twisted the final orb. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, light erupted. The orbs blazed, and the space within the arch filled with a swirling vortex of silver and gold. The celestial gate was open, but the surge of energy was unstable, shaking the mountain to its core. With a deafening roar, the cliff face beneath them sheared away. Ilara was thrown back as a cascade of stone and dust crashed down between them. When the world stopped shaking, she saw Rockin and 2 of his warriors, including Kale, were on the other side of a fresh wall of rubble, trapped and partially buried. The portal behind her pulsed, its light already beginning to flicker. She had mere moments before it collapsed. Her quest, the lost Sunstone, the truth of the Ethel, everything she had risked her life for, was one step away. But to abandon the people who had protected her was a price her conscience would not pay. She scrambled over the fallen rocks, ignoring the screaming protest of the unstable gate, and began digging with her bare hands. Her choice was immediate and without hesitation. She clawed at the debris until her fingers were raw, helping to heave a massive stone off of Rockin's leg. Together, they freed Kale, whose own leg was clearly injured. As they pulled him to safety, his gaze met Ilara's. The contempt was gone, replaced by a look of stunned, weary acknowledgement. He gave a single, slow nod. The alliance, once a transaction, was now a bond forged in rock and sacrifice. The gate shuddered violently, its light dimming. There was no more time. Supporting Kale between them, Ilara and Rockin lunged through the shimmering veil just as it tore itself apart behind them. The sensation was not of walking, but of falling upward. The world dissolved into a rush of color and sound before solidifying again. They stumbled forward, not onto stone, but onto a pathway of woven, living light. The air was cool and smelled of rain and ozone. Before them, hanging in a sky of perpetual dawn, was a city of impossible grace. Towers of pearlescent stone spiraled toward the clouds, connected by delicate bridges. Gardens flourished on floating terraces, and waterfalls cascaded into the open air, their water catching the light like strands of diamonds. This was no tomb, no silent ruin. The Ethel Empire was not lost. It was here, alive and suspended among the clouds. The air tasted of lightning and petrichor, a sharp, clean scent that filled Ilara with a strange sense of both awe and sorrow. This city of floating spires and gardens of light was not bustling with life as she had known it. Instead, its inhabitants were shimmering afterimages, echoes of the Ethel who walked its pathways. They were not flesh and blood, but forms woven from memory and story, their voices a soft hum on the edge of hearing. They were a civilization preserved in its own legend, and the sheer, beautiful fragility of it stole her breath. A figure coalesced before her, a being of shifting, incandescent light that called itself the Warden. It was the city's guardian, a consciousness formed from the collective will of the Ethel. Its presence was not hostile, but profoundly cautious. "You have crossed the veil, child of dust," it intoned, its voice resonating not in the air, but within her mind. "Many have sought the power we hid away. Few have understood the cost. You must prove you are a seeker of truth, not a plunderer of ghosts. To look upon the Sunstone is to accept the full weight of what we were." The Warden did not threaten her with force. Instead, it offered a trial, a journey into the heart of memory itself. The trial of echoes would not test her strength, but her empathy. Ilara was drawn into a vortex of light and sensation, her own consciousness merging with the recorded experiences of the Ethel founders. She was no longer an observer, she was a participant. In one moment, she felt the soaring triumph of raising the first spire, the collective hope of a people touching the sky. In the next, she was plunged into the chilling quiet of their greatest council hall, feeling the profound weight of a terrible choice. She witnessed not a glorious battle, but a quiet, deliberate decision to step back from the world. The Ethel had possessed power that could have subjugated entire continents, but they saw the cycle of conflict it would inevitably breed. Their most courageous act was not conquest, but relinquishment. They chose to fade, to become a story, in order to spare the world a war they knew they could win, but whose aftermath would poison the land for ages. This was not the noble, tragic fall she had imagined. It was a conscious, painful sacrifice, an act of humility that felt more devastating than any defeat. The final echo left her trembling. She had felt the sorrow of their last leader, not as a king losing his throne, but as a parent letting go of a child for its own good. The idealistic history she had carried in her heart, the one of a perfect empire, brought low by a single flaw, shattered. The truth was far more complex and far more human. When the Warden's voice returned, asking if she still sought the unvarnished stone, her answer came without hesitation. She chose the difficult, imperfect truth over the comforting lie. The Warden's light pulsed with a soft warmth. You have seen with our eyes and felt with our hearts. You are worthy. The Sunstone rests in the Chamber of Zenith, at the city's highest peak. But know this, speaker of tales, to wake the stone is to shine a light so bright it casts long shadows. It will call to the void weavers, entities that linger in the spaces between forgotten words. They feed on the erosion of history, and a truth remembered is a feast denied to them. They will come. As the Warden spoke, the gentle, perpetual dawn of the city seemed to dim. A deep cold seeped into the air, a chill that had nothing to do with the altitude. At the very edges of the floating metropolis, where the clouds met the sky, the shadows began to writhe and thicken, pulling themselves into forms that had no name. The cold was not of wind or ice, but of pure absence, a void that drank the light and warmth from the air. The void weavers moved through the city of memory like a stain, their forms shifting from mist to jagged shadow. Where they passed, the pearlescent stone of the spires did not crack, it simply faded, its color and substance leaching away into nothingness. They were not here to conquer, but to unmake. Rockin and his warriors met the first wave with spears of solidified sunlight, weapons provided by the Warden that flared with each impact. But the fight was a nightmare of logic. A weaver's touch did not break bones, it erased moments. One of the tribesmen cried out as a shadow brushed his arm, his eyes going wide with panic as he forgot his own son's name. The real horror was not the injury, but the hollow silence that followed. In the chaos, Kale fought with a ferocity born of his earlier shame, his injured leg forgotten. He positioned himself as a shield for Alara, his movements a defiant dance against the encroaching dark. But then a tendril of shadow, swift as a serpent, lashed out and grazed his shoulder. He stumbled back, his weapon clattering to the ground. The rage in his eyes dissolved into utter confusion. He looked at Alara, this stranger clutching a glowing map, and saw only an intruder, a threat to the fragile world he now found himself in. He snatched up his spear and leveled it at her, his face a mask of lost purpose. Rockin's voice cut through the din, a raw shout of command that held the weight of years. Kale, remember the sand, remember the climb. The chieftain's words were an anchor thrown into a storm of forgetting. Kale blinked, the fog in his mind parting for a single, crucial second. He saw Alara's face not as a foe's, but as the one who had dug him out of the mountain's collapse. His arm faltered, the spear point dipping toward the ground as a shudder of horrified realization racked his body. Alara knew they could not win this fight with strength alone. The weavers fed on forgotten stories, and they were losing theirs with every passing second. Her eyes fell to the star map, still pulsing softly in her hand. It was a record of history, a focal point of memory itself. It was a desperate, irreversible gamble. She raised the map high, pouring her own focus, her own will into its light. She did not attack, but instead wove a narrative of remembrance, a shield built from the very stories the weavers sought to consume. A dome of golden radiance erupted around their small group, pushing the shadows back. The void weavers recoiled from the barrier, their forms hissing like steam. But the map in her hand grew cold and heavy, its glow dimming perceptibly. She was burning its power, its very essence, to buy them minutes. From the central spire, the warden's voice echoed, now strained. The path is open to the Chamber of Zenith. Now, the shimmering bridge of light leading to the peak solidified before them. But as Alara took her first step, the protective barrier flickered, a hairline crack appearing in its golden surface. The weavers pressed in, sensing the weakness. Their desperate sprint for the summit had begun, with the memory of everything hanging by a thread. The Chamber of Zenith was a sphere of pure, silent crystal. At its heart, suspended in the air, hung the Sunstone. It was not a gem to be held, but a quiet, pulsing heart of light, its rhythm slow and mournful. It was asleep. The knowledge of how to wake it flowed into her mind from the fading star map, a final whisper from the Warden. It would not answer to a command, only to a remembrance. She had to sing the Empire's founding hymn, a melody she had only ever heard in broken pieces from her grandmother's lullabies. Her voice was not that of a trained singer, but it was steady and filled with the conviction of everything she had witnessed. She began softly, piecing the fragments together, the old words feeling foreign yet familiar on her tongue. As the song built, the Sunstone stirred. Its gentle pulse quickened, brightening from a soft glow to a radiant flare that filled the entire chamber with a light so pure it had no shadows. And with the light came the truth. It was not a book or a vision, but a raw, living torrent. The entire history of the Ethel civilization poured into her, not as facts, but as experiences. She felt the joy of their first harvest, the sting of their first loss, the quiet love of a mother for her child, the searing pain of a leader's impossible choice. It was a beautiful and devastating flood, and it threatened to shatter her own sense of self. Behind her, the sound of shattering crystal screamed through the chamber as the void weavers breached the doorway. Rockin and Kale stood shoulder to shoulder, their weapons of solid light flashing against the consuming darkness, but they were being forced back step by step. They were buying her seconds, not minutes. Alara understood then that she could not simply take the Sunstone. To carry its truth, she had to become its vessel. She made the choice freely. Instead of resisting the flood, she opened herself to it completely, accepting the beautiful, painful weight of an entire civilization's memory into the core of her being. The process was excruciating. She felt as though every cell in her body was being rewritten, her own life story interlacing with the lives of millions. When the last echo of a forgotten lullaby settled within her, the transformation was complete. The Sunstone's light dimmed, its purpose fulfilled, its knowledge now housed in a new living chronicle. Alara stood changed, her eyes holding the depth of ages, but her body was trembling and spent, vulnerable. And as the last of the stone's light faded, the Chamber of Zenith, its purpose served, began to groan and crack, shedding great shards of crystal into the open sky. The world was coming apart at the seams. With a groan of sundering stone, the Chamber of Zenith fractured, hurling shards of crystal into the endless sky. Alara's mind, now a swirling library of a civilization, screamed with 1,000 instincts at once. One path, a corridor that moments before had glowed with soft light, was now a cascade of falling debris. Another, a bridge of woven energy, flickered and died. But deep within the new memories, she saw the city not as it was, but as it had been designed, a blueprint overlaid on the chaos. This way, she urged, her voice carrying an unfamiliar, collective certainty. She led them not by sight, but by the ghost of a master architect's intention, ducking under archways a moment before they crumbled and leaping onto platforms just as they solidified. Rockin followed without question, his trust in her now absolute. But the Void Weavers, enraged by the loss of their feast, pursued them as a tide of hungry shadow, their silent advance erasing the very path behind them. They reached the plaza before the Celestial Gate, only to find their escape blocked by a wall of writhing darkness. The gate itself, a shimmering tear in reality, was just beyond it. "We are not going to make it," Rockin stated, his voice grim with finality. But Kale had already stopped running. He looked at the spear of solidified sunlight in his hand, then at the central plinth of the plaza, a control node he had seen Alara use in a memory that was not her own. His own memories of the desert, of his distrust and eventual respect, flashed in his eyes. His sacrifice would not be one of rage, but of clarity. "Go," he said, his voice cutting through the din of collapse. He turned and slammed his weapon into the control node. A wave of blinding white energy erupted from the plinth, a final, desperate surge of the city's warding power. It did not destroy the Weavers, but crystallized the air around them, trapping the entities in a prison of their own stolen light. The cost was immediate. The energy backlash seared through Kale, anchoring him to the spot as the crystal shell spread, encasing him and the Weavers together. His final look was not of pain, but of resolve. Rockin roared in protest, but the city was dying around them. The ground beneath their feet dissolved into mist. With a wrenching pull that tore at his very soul, the chieftain grabbed Alara's arm and hauled her toward the flickering gate. She resisted for a heartbeat, her new mind screaming in loss, but Rockin's practicality was the last tether to their world. They fell through the shimmering veil, just as the entire floating city folded in on itself, a dying star of memory and light. They tumbled back onto the cold, hard stone of the mountain peak. The world shuddered violently, and with a sound like a great, final sigh, the celestial gate shattered into a million motes of fading light. The connection was severed. The Spire of Dawn was just a mountain again, silent and empty under the stars. The Ethel Empire, in all its physical glory, was gone. It existed now only in the echoes of old stories, and in the quiet, burdened mind of the young woman who had become its final living chronicle. The journey back to the village was a silent, somber procession. Rockin walked beside her, a steady anchor in a world that now felt both vast and impossibly small, while Alara carried the immense quiet of the Ethel within her. The familiar huts and cooking fires of her home came into view, but they felt like a dream of a life that belonged to someone else. The entire village was gathered in the central clearing, the elders seated on their carved stools, their faces set in stern, expectant lines. They had awaited her return, not with hope, but with the grim certainty of her failure. As she stepped into the circle, the air grew taut. The head elder spoke first, his voice brittle with disapproval. "You were warned, Alara. You have brought only shadows back with you." But when she lifted her gaze to meet his, the words died in his throat. Her eyes were no longer a young woman's. They held the deep, patient light of forgotten stars. She did not defend herself or argue. She simply began to speak. Her voice was low, but it carried the weight of ages, and she did not tell them a story. She let them live it. She shared the true history of the Ethel, not as a list of kings and battles, but as a tapestry of feeling. The villagers felt the soaring joy of the first floating spire, the heartache of a mother singing a lullaby in a garden of light, and the crushing, noble sorrow of the final choice to fade into legend for the good of the world. They did not hear about sacrifice. They felt its quiet, devastating cost. When her words finally faded, the silence in the clearing was profound. The stern lines on the elders' faces had softened into streams of quiet tears. The head elder, his voice thick with emotion, formally revoked her banishment. "We were the ones who were lost," he admitted. "We kept the stories safe, but we forgot their heart. We will preserve them as they were meant to be." Yet, not everyone was comforted. A murmur of unease rippled through the crowd. "What power is this she holds?" a villager questioned, his voice edged with fear. "If a story can make us feel such things, is it safe to tell our children? Are we inviting forces we cannot control into our homes with our bedtime lore?" A passionate debate ignited, fracturing the newfound unity. Alara watched the conflict, feeling the Ethel's collective wisdom guide her response. She saw that a truth held by one person becomes a weapon, but a truth shared becomes a foundation. "I will not be the only keeper," she announced, her voice ringing with clear purpose. "This legacy is too vast for one soul to bear. I will teach anyone who wishes to learn, so that we may all share the responsibility of remembrance." The village's identity shifted in that moment, transforming from a quiet hamlet into a cradle for an empire's soul. But as the first group of eager new storytellers gathered around her in the firelight, a familiar, bone-deep cold prickled at the edge of her awareness. She looked past the circle of hopeful faces into the deep shadows of the tree line. There, for just a moment, a patch of darkness seemed to writhe, thicker and more intent than the rest. The Void Weavers had not been completely destroyed. They had simply learned to follow the scent of remembered truth. The warmth of the fire could not reach the chill that had settled in Alara's bones. Days after the village began its transformation into a sanctuary for stories, that persistent cold was the only warning they received. It was Rockin, ever watchful, who first noticed the subtle disturbance in the Elder's Lodge. A storage chest left ever so slightly ajar, the newly inscribed lore scrolls within smelling faintly of ozone and dust. They set a watch that night, and when a cloaked figure slipped back into the lodge with hands that seemed to drink the moonlight, they were waiting. The ensuing chase was swift and silent, a blur through the sleeping village and into the dense woods beyond, where the intruder vanished into the mouth of a hidden cave. Alara and Rockin followed without hesitation, the darkness within feeling unnaturally deep and still. They cornered the figure in a cavern glittering with faintly luminescent moss, and when Rockin wrestled the struggling form to the ground, the hood fell back to reveal not a void-spawned creature, but a man, his eyes wide with a fervent, chilling devotion. He was a cultist, a human servant of the very oblivion they feared. Under their firm but restrained questioning, the man's fanaticism spilled out. He spoke of a sect known as the Unwritten, who worship the Void Weavers as divine purifiers. They believe history is a burden, a prison of pain and memory from which all life must be freed. Their sacred mission is to find and destroy every hidden cache of ancient knowledge, every last library of fallen empires, and they had started here, with the newly recorded legacy of the Ethel. The cultist's voice grew shrill as he revealed the terrifying scope of their enemy. The weavers Alara had faced in the Sky City were mere scouts, drawn by the initial awakening of the Sunstone. The true incursion, a tide of unmaking meant to permanently sever the world from its own past, was planned for the next lunar eclipse, a celestial event only days away. The weight of his words settled heavily in the silent cave. Alara looked from Rockin's grim face to the terrified, zealous eyes of their captive. Remaining in the village, merely defending their single scroll, was a guarantee of defeat. The enemy was moving against all of history, and to stand against them, they could not hide. They had to unite the very treasures the unwritten sought to destroy. "We must find the other caches," Alara said, her voice quiet but absolute. "We find the lost libraries of other fallen peoples, warn their guardians, and stand together." This is no longer about preserving one story. It is about safeguarding the very foundation of our world. The cultist, hoping to buy his freedom, reluctantly surrendered a crudely drawn map from his tunic. It was a chart of known and suspected locations, and his trembling finger pointed to one marked with a sigil of swirling mist, the Meridian Sea and its chain of perpetually fog-shrouded islands, the supposed resting place of the next library on their grim list. The sea was a deceptive blanket of calm for the first 3 days. Their ship, a lean vessel built for speed, cut through the waves with a purpose that belied the quiet dread in their hearts. Alara stood at the prow, her hand resting on the rail, not seeing the water, but feeling the pull of a memory that was not her own, a star chart of forgotten currents and the scent of salt on a different wind. She guided their course with a quiet certainty that left the seasoned sailors among them in awe. But on the 4th night, the stars vanished. A bank of fog, thick and cold as a shroud, rolled in from the north, and with it came a wind that carried the faint, acrid taste of ozone. The storm that followed was not born of nature. The waves rose in sharp, unnatural peaks, and the wind howled with a voice that seemed to articulate a single, chilling word: forget. Their ship, for all its swiftness, was a toy in that malevolent grip. With a splintering crash that tore through the night, it struck the hidden teeth of a reef, the sound of breaking timber, a death knell for their hopes of a simple voyage. They were thrown into the churning, icy water, clutching desperately at floating debris as they fought their way toward a dark shape on the horizon. They dragged themselves onto the shore of a small, stark island as the first light of dawn bled into the sky, their bodies bruised and their supplies reduced to the sodden packs on their backs. The island itself felt like a trap. The pale sand shifted under their feet with a will of its own, creating false horizons and leading them in endless, exhausting circles back to the same cove. Thirst became a sharp, relentless companion. It was Rockin who first noticed the pattern, his desert-honed eyes seeing the intelligence in the deception. "This land is alive, and it does not want guests," he growled, his voice rough with fatigue. Alara closed her eyes, letting the chorus of Ethel memories rise within her. They spoke not of conquest, but of communion. She did not command the island. Instead, she began to hum, then to sing, a wordless melody of greeting and respect that her grandmother had sung to the soil of their own village. It was a song of belonging, not of ownership. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, the very ground seemed to sigh. The sand stilled its constant, treacherous shifting, and a path of darker, damp earth revealed itself, winding away from the shore and into a grove of stunted, wind-twisted trees. It led them to a small, clear spring, bubbling up from between moss-covered rocks, and just beyond it, Carved into the cliff face behind the spring was an archway, hidden by what appeared to be a curtain of water. But this waterfall defied the sky, its waters flowing upward into a misty void above the stone. The sound that emanated from within was not the roar of a cascade, but the soft, constant rustle of 1,000 pages turning, the whisper of 1,000,000 recorded thoughts. Taking a deep breath, Alara stepped through the upward flowing veil, the cool water a shock that did not wet her skin, and into the silent, waiting heart of the Library of Tides. The air within the Library of Tides tasted of salt and old parchment. They stood in a cavern of breathtaking scale, its vaulted ceiling lost in a gloom pierced by the soft, shifting light of countless pearls. These glowing orbs were nestled in shelves of living coral that pulsed with a gentle, rhythmic light, as if the entire library were a single, breathing entity. The only sound was the soft, constant rustle, like pages turning in a distant room. Before them, the water curtain they had passed through shimmered, holding back the immense pressure of the ocean, a testament to the ancient magic that preserved this place. From the shadows between the coral shelves, a shape emerged, fluid and silent. It was an octopus of immense size, its skin shifting through patterns of deep blue and silver, and its eyes held an intelligence that felt ancient and vast. This was the librarian. It did not speak with words, but a question formed directly in their minds, a simple, profound demand. What new memory do you bring to my collection? The rules were clear. The librarian would only grant access to its core archives in exchange for a unique memory, one it had never before encountered. Alara's mind, a library in itself, raced through the history of the Ethel. She could offer a great invention or a terrible conflict, but those felt like transactions. Then she found it, buried deep within the collective consciousness she carried. It was not a memory of power or loss, but of a beginning. She closed her eyes and offered it freely. The very moment the first Ethel looked at the starry sky, not in fear, but in wonder, and wove a tale to explain its beauty. It was the memory of creating the very first story. She felt the librarian's consciousness embrace the experience. For a creature that catalogued all of history, the raw, innocent spark of pure inspiration was a rare treasure. A wave of delight, warm and shimmering, washed over them. The great being's tentacles rippled with pleasure, and a section of the living coral wall behind it ear-eyed open, revealing a passage glowing with a brighter, more concentrated light. The core archives were now accessible. Their triumph was devastatingly brief. A concussive blast echoed through the cavernous space, and the protective water curtain trembled, then shattered. Figures clad in dark robes poured through the breach, their movements sharp and purposeful. They were the unwritten, and they did not pause to look or learn. They raised strange, resonant tools and began shattering the knowledge pearls. Each destruction was a small tragedy. A pearl containing the recipe for a forgotten healing balm burst into a shower of light and the scent of lavender, then vanished. Another, holding the lyrical structure of an epic poem, dissolved with the echo of a final, unfinished note. Each loss was permanent, a unique thread of history snipped away forever. Rockin did not hesitate. He barked orders, and his small band of villagers, though outnumbered, used the library's own confusing, organic layout as a shield. They broke into pairs, drawing the cultists into narrow alleys of coral, where the invaders' numerical advantage meant nothing, engaging in a desperate, swirling melee to protect the shelves. The cultist leader, a tall man with a voice like grinding stone, watched the destruction with fervent satisfaction. He shouted over the chaos, his goal laid bare. You cling to your chains of yesterday. We work for a clean world, a blank slate free from the pain and error of every past that came before. His words were a poison, justifying the eradication of all that made them who they were. Ilara knew they could not save every pearl. She turned to the librarian, their minds connecting once more in shared urgency. The great octopus understood. It shared a final, desperate protocol with her, an emergency preservation ritual. It would cause the library to seal its most vital core and sink itself into the deepest, most inaccessible trench of the seabed, a hibernation from which it might never wake. Together, they began, their combined will focusing on the central spire of coral. As the ritual took hold, a deep groan resonated through the cavern. The floor shuddered, and the immense magic holding back the ocean began to invert. The entire library was beginning to sink. Icy water started to spray from new cracks in the ceiling. They had only minutes. Rockin called the retreat, his warriors disengaging and falling back toward the core archives passage. Ilara, with the librarian's guidance, used a final surge of focus to fracture a small, radiant piece from the central coral spire, a core sample containing the library's most essential records. Clutching the warm, pulsating fragment, she joined the desperate sprint for the exit as cold, black water began to pour in from above. Cold salt water stung their eyes and choked their breaths as they fought through the labyrinth. The Library of Tides was a drowning beast, its glowing coral halls now choked with swirling debris and the dark shapes of pursuing cultists. Ilara's mind, a repository of ancient blueprints, calculated paths through the chaos. Not here, she shouted over the roar of incoming water, her voice cutting through the panic. The main corridor collapses next. This way, she led them down a narrower, spiraling passage, the walls shuddering around them. Rockin and his warriors formed a rear guard, their movements slowing in the chest-deep water as they fended off attacks from the fanatics who seemed willing to drown with the knowledge they sought to destroy. Breaking into a final, vast antechamber, they saw the exit, a shimmering arch of light at the top of a submerged stone staircase. But the way was blocked by a reinforced grate, and the water was rising fast. The librarian, its great form suddenly beside them, pressed the master pearl into Ilara's hands. The smooth, warm sphere seemed to pulse with a captured ocean of memory. Then, the being turned its immense intelligence toward the sealed grate. Its powerful tentacles gripped the metal, and with a groan of straining stone, it began to wrench the barrier open. A final, clear thought echoed in all their minds. Go, my story ends with my library. Theirs ends here with me. The choice was a knife in Ilara's heart, but hesitation would mean the loss of everything. She gave a single, sharp nod of gratitude and grief. As the last of her group scrambled through the widening gap, she saw the librarian release the grate and turn to face the oncoming cultists, its body a final, living barricade. Ilara triggered the ancient mechanism she knew was there, and a massive stone slab slammed down, sealing the passage forever and silencing the frantic shouts from the other side. They erupted onto a rocky beach, gasping and retching seawater as the ground beneath them gave a final, violent shudder. The entire island seemed to sink an inch, and the entrance to the library vanished beneath the churning waves, leaving only a whirlpool that quickly faded into calm. They had saved one pearl, one more thread of history, but the weight of the librarian's choice was a stone in each of their souls. As they caught their breath on the unfamiliar shore, Rockin's hand fell heavily on Alara's shoulder. He pointed a grim finger out to sea. There, cutting through the morning mist, was a ship with black sails, its course set away from them with a purpose that was anything but random. Their enemy was not just an idea anymore. They were a fleet, and they now knew they were being hunted. The summit of winds was a place that did not exist on any map, a needle of black rock piercing the cloud layer where the air was thin, and the only sound was the endless sigh of the planet turning. Here, Alara performed the astral projection ritual, a dangerous weaving of thought and memory that left her physically drained, but sent a silent, clarion call, humming along the hidden ley lines of the world. She did not know if anyone would answer. For 3 days they waited. Then they came. First, a section of the rock itself seemed to shift and stand, revealing itself as a dwarf of immense stature, his beard woven with metallic threads and his eyes holding the deep, patient light of carved stone. He was Borin, runekeeper of Sunken. Next, the air itself shimmered, and a figure coalesced from the mist, her form slender and her feathered cloak rustling with a sound like distant wind chimes. She was Lyra, sky singer of the lost rock kingdoms. Finally, the sand at their feet swirled upward, gathering into a humanoid shape that never fully solidified, its features shifting like a desert mirage. This was the silent sand shaper of the buried glass cities, a being known only as Kale. The silence that followed was heavier than the mountain beneath them. Borin's voice was a low rumble, like grinding tectonic plates. You speak of a threat that would unmake the past. My people's halls have withstood the weight of oceans. What can a whisper of shadow do to solid stone? Lyra's melodic voice held a sharp edge of skepticism. The rock fled the pettiness of the earth long ago. Why should we descend into a conflict that is not our own? Kale remained motionless, a sentinel of sand, offering no opinion, only watchful silence. The distrust was a palpable wall, each guardian a fortress protecting a single, precious truth, and Alara was the outsider demanding they throw open their gates. She saw the deadlock for what it was, a failure of trust, not of purpose. Words alone would not break it. With a deep breath, she reached into her pack and withdrew the master pearl from the Library of Tides. It glowed with a soft, captured luminescence, humming with the entire compressed history of the Meridian Sea. This was not just a treasure, it was a sacred trust, the last breath of a civilization. Without a word of explanation, she walked to the center of their tense circle and placed it gently on a flat stone. I offer you the memory of an ocean, she said, her voice quiet but clear. So you may know my intent is not for one empire, but for all. The gesture shattered the stalemate. Borin's stern expression softened into one of grudging respect. Lyra's skeptical gaze turned to one of astonished recognition. Even the shifting sands of Kale stilled for a moment in what could only be awe. To share such a thing was the ultimate act of faith. It proved her cause was greater than any one legacy. In that moment, the Concord of Echoes was born, a fragile alliance of 4, pledging to pool their knowledge and stand against the coming tide of oblivion. but the sheer power of their combined will, the convergence of 4 distinct ancient magics in one place, sent a ripple through the fabric of the world that was impossible to hide. It was a beacon. As they spoke their vows of unity, the eternal winds of the peak died abruptly. The air grew deathly still and cold, a deep, familiar chill that had nothing to do with the altitude. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was the silence of a predator holding its breath. The unnatural silence shattered as the mountain peak itself seemed to scream. The sky tore open, not with lightning, but with ragged wounds of absolute blackness, and from them poured the unwritten. They swarmed the sacred rock, their movements a blur of fanatical purpose, led by a figure whose form drank the light from the very air around him. A void-touched sorcerer, his eyes burning with the cold fire of annihilation. The battle for the summit of winds was not a clash of armies, but a war of realities. Warden, the runekeeper, slammed his fists onto the stone, and glowing sigils of protection flared to life across the plateau, walls of ancient granite rising to meet the onslaught. Kale, the sand shaper, turned the very dust underfoot into a whirling storm of cutting glass, while Alara shouted warnings pulled from the memories of 1,000 forgotten battles, anticipating the enemy's movements before they even formed. Yet the true horror of their foe became clear as the sorcerer fixed his gaze on Lyra. He did not attack her body, he attacked her song, a wave of muffling magic, a sphere of absolute silence, slammed into the sky singer, smothering the nascent power in her throat. She staggered, her eyes wide with a terror far deeper than pain, her very identity as a sonic warrior being systematically erased. She was their heart, their harmony, and the enemy knew it. Alara saw the panic in Lyra's eyes and understood. She gripped Boren's arm, her mind flashing with an Ethel memory of resonant frequencies and sympathetic vibration. "We must give her a voice," she urged. The dwarf's eyes narrowed in comprehension. Together they acted. Boren carved a new, intricate rune of amplification directly into the stone at Lyra's feet, while Alara channeled the precise tonal memory of a crystal that could shatter silence. Their powers fused, and a dome of shimmering, humming energy erupted around the stricken guardian. Inside that resonant shield, the sorcerer's silencing magic shattered like glass. Lyra drew a ragged, grateful breath, and then she sang. It was not a melody of war, but a single, pure note of creation, a sound so full of light and life that it physically manifested as a blinding wave of solid radiance. The note washed over the first ranks of the cultists. They did not scream or fall. They simply unraveled, their forms dissolving back into the forgotten echoes they served. The tide of battle turned in that single, glorious moment. The remaining invaders faltered, their certainty broken. The void-touched sorcerer, however, did not fall. He stood amidst the fading chaos, his form flickering. "This was but a test of your resolve," he hissed, his voice a dry rustle in their minds. "The eclipse approaches. We will meet at the heart of the world, where all your precious histories will be unwritten into a final, beautiful silence." With that, the space around him folded inward, and he was gone. The victory felt hollow, the air thick with the spent energy of their magic and the grim knowledge of what was to come. As they tended to their exhausted group, Rockin knelt beside a fallen cultist, prying a sealed scroll case from the individual's grip. He unrolled the parchment, his brow furrowing. It was a map, but unlike any chart of land or sea. It depicted ley lines converging on a single, pulsing point, labeled in a dead language. Ilara did not need to read the words. The memory surfaced in her mind with chilling clarity. The heart of the world, she whispered, the name itself a weight. It is not a place on any map. It is where the story of our world first began. The world's spine mountains were a fortress of jagged stone and screaming winds, a landscape that seemed to dare any living thing to enter. The journey to its secret heart was a gauntlet of the mind as much as the body. One moment, the path ahead would appear as a solid bridge of rock, only for Lyra's sharp eyes to see the truth, a sheer drop into misty nothingness. Another moment, Boren would plant his feet, refusing to move forward as a temporal distortion showed him a vision of his own people's hallowed halls collapsing into dust, a past trauma made terrifyingly present. Kale's shifting form was the only thing that could navigate the patches of unstable ground that looked solid to everyone else. Their progress was a halting, painful symphony of different senses, each guardian's unique perception, a vital piece of a puzzle that no single one of them could solve alone. The constant strain began to wear their fragile alliance thin. A sharp argument erupted when Boren, shaken by his vision, accused Lyra's people of abandoning the world below in its time of need. Her retort was swift and bitter, a centuries-old grievance about dwarven isolationism, the old rivalries, the ancient wounds between their fallen empires, flared in the thin, cold air, threatening to shatter the concord before it even reached its goal. Ilara stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. She did not command them to stop. Instead, she wove a story, a memory pulled not from one people, but from the spaces between them. She spoke of a forgotten winter, when a lost rock fledgling was sheltered in the warm forges of Khazad-dûm, and how the Sky Singers later guided a dwarven expedition through a lethal storm. You see, she finished softly, your strengths were never meant to stand alone. They were meant to fit together, like the pieces of a story that only makes sense when it is whole. The anger in their eyes cooled, replaced by a weary, reluctant acknowledgement. The truth in her tale was a bridge they could not deny. Pushing forward with renewed, if tense, focus, they finally found it. A fissure in the mountain so narrow it was almost invisible, humming with a deep, primordial energy. This was the entrance to the heart of the world, but their moment of discovery was instantly soured. The ground at the mouth of the fissure was churned and littered with the detritus of a hasty camp. Black robes, discarded tools, and the chilling, acrid scent of a magic that sought only to consume. The unwritten had not just found the heart, they had already descended. From the dark tunnel ahead, a sound echoed up to meet them, deep and rhythmic. It was not the chaotic noise of battle, but the focused, practiced cadence of a chant, a ritual already in its advanced stages. The final confrontation for the soul of history had begun without them. The air within the heart of the world hummed with the agony of dying light. They burst into a cavern of impossible scale, a geode of living crystal, whose walls were veined with rivers of liquid radiance. These were the timelines of civilizations, each stream a unique color and melody, flowing into a vast, shimmering central pool. But the unwritten's ritual was a poison in the veins of the world. All around them, streams were guttering out, their vibrant hues fading to a dull gray, their songs cut short into silence. In the chamber's center, the void-touched sorcerer hovered above the pool, his hands conducting the erosion. pulling threads of history from the light and letting them dissolve into nothing. With each lost stream, the crystal under their feet grew more translucent, and the air itself began to thin, the very stability of memory and matter starting to fray. They were not just losing the past, they were losing the foundation of the present. The scene was a chaotic storm of 4 collapsing fronts. Rockin and his warriors clashed with the remaining cultists, their struggle a desperate dance on the increasingly fragile floor. The sorcerer maintained his devastating ritual, immune to their physical attacks, behind a shield of concentrated oblivion. Ilara tried to counter the magic, but her efforts were like trying to bail out an ocean with a single cup. And the environment itself rebelled, as sections of the crystal floor would simply vanish, opening into pits of starless night. A direct assault was futile. They were losing. Then the solution came to Ilara not as a memory, but as a harmony. She could not fight the void. She had to outshine it. She shouted over the din, her voice ringing with crystalline clarity. We must amplify what remains. Each of you, find your people's light. Give it your voice. It was a plea that transcended their old rivalries. Without a second thought, Warden the runekeeper ran to a stream of deep, gem-like amber, the light of Sunken Kazadim. He pressed his hands to the crystal and began a low, resonant chant in the tongue of his ancestors, the words of unyielding stone and deep-forged loyalty. The fading amber stream flared, its light strengthening and pushing back against the gray decay encircling it. Lyra, the sky singer, found a river of brilliant sapphire, the legacy of the rock kingdoms, and she poured her voice into it, a soaring, wordless area of free skies and boundless horizons. The sapphire light blazed with renewed vigor. Even the silent Kale moved to a stream of shifting, opalescent sand, and as his form merged with it, the light pulsed with a warm, patient glow, the enduring story of the desert. For a moment, it worked. A chorus of defiance swelled in the cavern, a shield of remembered glory, holding back the tide of nothingness. The unraveling of reality slowed. But their unity was their greatest threat. The void-touched sorcerer, enraged by this resurgence of everything he sought to destroy, turned his full, chilling attention away from the central pool. His burning gaze locked not on the guardians reinforcing their own lights, but on the one who had orchestrated it all. He fixed his eyes on Ilara, the linchpin, holding their fragile song together. The sorcerer's attack was a silent one, a tide of psychic anguish that crashed over Ilara's mind. It was not a battle of spells, but a weaponization of memory itself. He did not show her images of monsters or destruction. He showed her the quiet, devastating moments she carried within. The grief of a mother who lost a child to a forgotten illness. The shame of a leader who made a choice that cost thousands their homes. The despair of an artist whose greatest work was lost to time. Every sorrow, every failure, every moment of pain from the entire history of the Ethel and the other fallen peoples rose up inside her all at once, a crushing weight of millennia of suffering. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the crystalline floor, a low cry escaping her lips. The streams of light she had been bolstering flickered and dimmed, their colors washing out as her will faltered under the assault. How could anyone bear this? A treacherous voice within her whispered, echoing the sorcerer's intent. To let it all fade would be a mercy, a final, peaceful silence. But as she hovered on the edge of surrender, another memory surfaced, not of pain, but of its counterpoint. It was the fierce, protective love of that same mother, singing a lullaby in the face of loss. It was the leader's determination to build something new from the ruins of his mistake. It was the artist's sheer, unbridled joy in the act of creation itself, a feeling so pure it outshone the fate of the finished piece. She saw that the sorrow and the joy were not separate. They were intertwined, each giving the other its meaning. The pain of a story's end was what made its middle so precious. To erase the hardship was to erase the resilience it forged. To forget the loss was to devalue the love that caused it. This was not a burden to be discarded. It was the full, messy, beautiful truth of what it meant to be alive. She made the choice. She stopped fighting the weight of the sorrow and instead opened her heart to embrace it all, the heartbreak and the hope, the failure and the triumph, the endings and the beginnings. She accepted the entirety of the story. This act of total, unconditional acceptance did not weaken her. It completed a circuit. The positive memories of love, discovery, courage, and simple kindness now flowed through her with the same intensity as the pain, but with a purer, brighter energy. A feedback loop of pure life force erupted from her, a wave of golden radiance that did not attack the void, but simply filled it. The sorcerer's form shuddered violently. His power was rooted in the negation of memory, in the idea that history was only pain. Faced with this undeniable, overwhelming affirmation of life in all its facets, his connection to the Void Weavers snapped. The cold fire in his eyes winked out, not with a scream, but with a sigh of dissipating dust. His form unraveled into motes of fading shadow, and then into nothing at all. But his last ritual, now masterless and broken, did not simply stop. The unstable energies he had unleashed recoiled through the chamber, causing the entire heart of the world to groan as if in its death throes. The delicate balance was shattered, and the chaotic power of the collapsed ritual now threatened to tear the very nexus of history apart from the inside. The heart of the world screamed in its final death throes, a deafening crackle of sundering crystal and unraveling light. With the sorcerer gone, the chaotic energy he had unleashed had no master and no direction. It was a storm with no eye, threatening to tear the nexus of all history into glittering, meaningless dust. Boren the Runekeeper stood firm as the ground splintered around him, his gaze fixed on the central pool, where the timelines churned in a violent, blinding maelstrom. His voice, a low rumble that cut through the chaos, held no hesitation. The core must be stabilized, he declared. The structure is sound, but the foundation is shaking itself apart. Someone must anchor it. His eyes met each of theirs in turn, a look of ancient, weary finality. I am the oldest stone here. This is my duty. Before any protest could form, he was already moving. He slammed his palms onto the largest remaining crystal spire, the one feeding directly into the central pool. He began to chant, not in the language of his people, but in the primal tongue of the mountain itself, the words of pressure and permanence. Glowing runes, symbols of unyielding foundation and eternal memory, seared themselves from his hands into the crystal, crawling up its length like veins of molten gold. The light did not just surround him, it consumed him. His form began to solidify, his skin taking on the lustrous, translucent quality of the living geode. He was not being encased, he was becoming one with the heart. his own life force and endless memory, binding the fractured timelines back into a stable, humming whole. The violent shaking ceased. The wild light calmed into a gentle, rhythmic pulse. Borin, the last runekeeper of Khazad-dûm, had become a permanent, silent sentinel within the mountain, a new legend forged in the world's most secret heart. There was no time for farewells. A great section of the ceiling gave way, and Lyra shouted a warning. They had to go. As they turned to flee the stabilizing chamber, Alara's hand moved on its own. With a sharp fragment of crystal, she carved a swift, deep inscription into the wall beside the archway. It was not his name or his titles, but the story of his choice, the elder who became the cornerstone. She would not let his sacrifice be a silent one. It would be part of the history he had died to protect. They scrambled back through the trembling tunnels, the weight of another profound loss of stone in each of their chests, yet carried forward by the fragile hope his action had secured. They burst out onto the mountainside, just as the last sliver of the lunar eclipse passed, the familiar silver light of the moon washing over a world that looked exactly the same as it had hours before. But for them, everything felt different. The very air seemed heavier, filled with the silent, enduring presence of a guardian who now watched over the first page of every story yet to be told. The journey back to the village was a quiet pilgrimage through a world that now felt both older and newer than before. When the familiar hills finally came into view, the air was no longer filled with just the scent of wood smoke and baking bread, but with the vibrant hum of many voices raised in discussion and song. The small hamlet had transformed, in their absence, into a bustling sanctuary. Its borders expanded with new lodges and open-air learning spaces, all dedicated to the art of remembrance. Alara was not met with cheers for a hero, but with the warm, practical greetings reserved for a beloved teacher returning home. The work of weaving history back into the fabric of daily life had already taken root. The surviving guardians of the Concord, Lyra and Kale, saw in this thriving community not just a refuge, but a purpose. They decided then to make the village their permanent home, a living library where the saved histories of the Ethel, the Rock, and the glass cities could be shared, compared, and protected under one sky. Yet, weaving these distinct threads into a single tapestry was not a simple task. A spirited debate could erupt over the proper way to recount a single event. A follower of Lyra might insist a historical moment was best understood through the soaring melody composed for it, while a villager trained in the Ethel tradition would argue for the precise, layered narrative preserved in their chronicles. Minor disputes flared over which stories were most vital to teach the children first, each guardian understandably protective of their own people's legacy. To prevent any one voice from drowning out the others, Alara established a rotating council of storytellers. Each guardian, along with a chosen elder from the village itself, would take turns leading the council's discussions, ensuring their hard-won alliance remained a true partnership of equals. This structure honored every history, acknowledging that the story of a single stone was as important as the epic of an entire sky kingdom when building a complete understanding of the past. This village, now named the Sanctuary of Echoes, had become a brilliant beacon in a world that still tended to forget. Its very existence was a quiet defiance, and with that prominence came a need for constant vigilance. The thread of the unwritten may have been broken, but the allure of a simpler, less burdened past remained a temptation for some. The responsibility to safeguard this light was a weight shared by every soul who called the sanctuary home. As the first soft snow of winter began to fall, blanketing the lodges in a hush, Ilara sat by the central hearth. A new group of wide-eyed children gathered at her feet, their anticipation a tangible warmth in the air. She smiled, the countless stories within her settling into a gentle calm, and she began to tell them the tale of how their quiet village became the keeper of the world's most precious dreams. The first annual winter gathering filled the sanctuary of echoes with a warmth that defied the season. Storytellers from every corner of the known world huddled in the great lodges, their voices weaving a rich tapestry of sound as they shared the preserved lore of their peoples. Ilara moved among them, a quiet conductor of this symphony of memory, her greatest joy found in the learning circles where she personally guided the next generation through the new, unified history. She taught them to see the connections, how the steadfastness of the Runekeeper's stone was echoed in the patient sands of the desert, and how the Sky Singer's freedom was a different kind of truth from the Ethel's sacrifice. The event was a profound success, forging a powerful, shared identity from histories that had once been guarded in jealous isolation. Yet this vibrant unity was tested when a delegate from the Iron Marches arrived. He was a man clad in steel and pragmatism, his demeanor radiating skepticism for what he called the soft power of stories. He openly questioned the value of preserving what he termed dead empires, arguing that resources spent on memories were wasted when they could be spent on fortifications and future conquests. Ilara did not rise to debate him. Instead, with a calm that disarmed his bluster, she invited him to simply listen. She led him to a circle where a young child, her voice clear and earnest, was recounting the story of Boren's final choice in the heart of the world. The child spoke not of magic or power, but of an elder's love for his people and his unwavering duty to protect the very ground beneath their feet. As the tale unfolded, the delegate's stern expression began to falter. The raw, unvarnished emotion in the child's telling, the profound truth of a sacrifice made for all people, reached past his armor of cynicism. He did not speak when the story ended, but gave a slow, deep nod of respect. His alliance silently won. It was a powerful reminder that these stories could build bridges across the widest cultural chasms, dissolving prejudice not with force, but with shared feeling. That night, as a brilliant aurora danced in shimmering curtains of green and violet above the sanctuary, Ilara stood alone in the quiet. A gentle, reassuring pulse bloomed within her, a soft echo from the Ethel memories she carried. It was not a call to action or a warning, but a simple, profound sign that the stories were breathing, thriving, and truly alive. Leo was the quiet boy who always listened from the back. While other children fidgeted during story time, his gaze was distant, as if watching a play only he could see. One morning, a younger child awoke speaking of soaring through pearlescent towers and hearing the hum of a city made of light. She described the cloud city of Ethel with a clarity that went beyond Ilara's words, a clarity she had only felt in her own memories. The child revealed that Leo had told her a story before bed, and she had dreamed it exactly as he described. He was not just a listener, he was a dream weaver, a rare soul who could spin tales into living dreams for others to experience. The impact was immediate and profound. For the first time, the histories were not just heard, but felt. Children who had struggled to understand the Ethel's sacrifice now spoke of the quiet sorrow in the empty throne room as if they had stood there themselves. The stories were sinking into their hearts, not just their minds, but this new power sparked a sharp debate among the village elders. An elder named Oren voiced the fear that haunted several of them. If our children live the stories in their dreams, he argued, how can we be sure they remember the truth, and not just the feeling? What if the dream of a king's choice becomes more real than the record of his actual words? This was a conflict over the very soul of storytelling, a question of whether emotional truth could ever be a safe vessel for historical fact. Alara saw the immense promise and the profound danger in Leo's gift. She knew the unwritten had targeted scrolls and stones, but a dream was a different kind of record, one that could be twisted from within. She took Leo on as her first official apprentice, and her first lesson was about responsibility, not technique. She established a clear, unwavering rule. The dream must always be built from the foundation of the Chronicle. The emotional journey must serve the historical one, never replace it. Leo learned to anchor every dream image in a verified memory from the archives, understanding that his gift was a bridge, not an artist's canvas. The stakes of this new method were staggering. If successful, dream lore could weave the histories so deeply into the identity of the next generation that they would become unshakable, surviving for thousands of years as an inherited experience. But this also made the children's minds a new frontier, a potential battleground. Any lingering whispers of oblivion would surely see this living library of dreams as the ultimate prize to corrupt or silence. One evening, Alara watched as Leo guided a small group of children through the first tale of the Ethel. He spoke in a soft, rhythmic cadence, and as the children drifted into a peaceful sleep, their faces relaxed into gentle smiles of wonder. Standing in the quiet lodge, surrounded by their sleeping breaths, Alara felt a profound shift. The legacy was no longer just preserved in scrolls or in her own mind. It was now taking root in the most fertile soil imaginable, the boundless imagination of a child. The great hall of the sanctuary now held a new heart, a vast, empty loom that stood as a silent promise against the far wall. Inspired by the profound connection Leo's dream lore had forged, Alara and the Concord conceived a project of breathtaking scale, a living tapestry they named the Map of Memories. Its purpose was to give physical form to the fragile network of stories they protected, where a single silver thread could trace the rise of the Ethel spires, and a strand of amber glass bead might capture the final, patient song of the desert cities. For weeks, the hall was filled with the rhythmic, meditative sounds of creation. The weavers, guided by the guardians, worked with a reverence usually reserved for prayer, their hands moving in careful concert. Yet this was no ordinary craft. Each thread pulled not on wool or silk, but on the very essence of a remembered moment, requiring a portion of the weaver's own focus and a sliver of the guardian's power to anchor it into the whole. A single misplaced knot did not just look awkward, it could cause a tangible dissonance, a fraying of the connected memory that felt like a sudden, hollow silence in the mind. The strain was a constant, humming pressure in the room, a price willingly paid for such a beautiful burden. The first true test came without warning. A section of the tapestry depicting the intricate, wind-sculpted towers of the Sara glass cities began to unravel, its threads turning brittle and pale as forgotten sand. The cause was not a weaving error, but the lingering echo of an ancient grievance, an old rivalry between the sky and the desert that had subtly poisoned the shared effort. For a long moment, the sand shaper Kale and the sky singer Lyra stared at the damage, the weight of centuries of separation hanging between them. Then, Lyra began to hum, a low, steadying note that held the memory of the wind that shapes the dunes. Kale's shifting form stilled, and in a movement of perfect trust, he began to guide new threads of opalescent sand into the loom, his work now harmonizing with her song. Together, they wove not just a repair, but a reconciliation, their people's histories finally intertwining without conflict. When the last thread of the Ethel Empire was set into its place, a final silver line joining a constellation of pearlescent light, the entire tapestry fell utterly still. Then it shimmered, a wave of soft radiance washing from its center to its edges. For one breathtaking heartbeat, the great hall was filled with a chorus of 1,000 distant voices, the proud songs of the rock riders, the deep chants of the dwarven delvers, the whispering hymns of the desert, and the soaring harmonies of the Ethel, all singing together in a perfect, fleeting chord of remembrance. The silence that returned was deeper and more profound than before. The map of memories was now more than a record. It was a living, breathing entity, its woven stories holding a power as tangible as any fortress wall. Protecting this artifact, this heart of their shared soul, had just become as vital as protecting the knowledge it represented. The gentle pulse of the map of memories was a comforting rhythm in the great hall, a constant reminder of their hard-won unity. That rhythm was interrupted by the arrival of a visitor from the sea. A dolphin-like being, sleek and intelligent, surfaced in the village's central reflecting pool, its presence announced not by sound, but by the shimmering, spherical water bubbles that rose from its blowhole. Each bubble, popping softly in the air, released not a mist, but a complex, melodic thought directly into the minds of those gathered. It was a messenger from the deep, a final gift from the librarian of tides. In its mouth, it carried a single, luminous seed pearl, an object that hummed with the compressed potential of an entire ocean of stories. This was not merely an artifact. It was a seed that could, with years of careful tending, grow into a new, living library, a vibrant backup for all the knowledge they had fought so desperately to preserve. This miraculous gift immediately sparked a fierce and quiet debate among the elders. The seed represented ultimate security, a way to ensure their sacred work could never be erased by a single catastrophe. But where to plant it became a question that divided them. Some, like the cautious elder Orin, argued for secrecy, for hiding the seed in a remote, warded cave where its power would remain undetectable. Others believed it should be the new, protected heart of their sanctuary, a treasure to be guarded at all costs. A smaller, fearful faction whispered that cultivating such a potent locus of memory was like lighting a beacon, an invitation for every remaining force of oblivion to find them once more. The safety of their legacy was suddenly pitted against the safety of their people. Alara listened to the arguments, feeling the weight of the Ethel's own history with isolation. She stepped forward, the seed pearl resting cool in her palm. Hiding this gift, she suggested, would be a victory for the very fear the unwritten had wielded. To hoard knowledge in the shadows was to admit that light could not protect it. She proposed they plant the seed in the center of the village square, unhidden and open to the sky, as a living statement that true knowledge must be accessible to all who seek it with a pure heart. It was a declaration that their purpose was built on courage, not on concealment. After a long, thoughtful silence, Rockin was the first to nod his agreement, his practical nature seeing the strength in such a bold, open challenge. The planting was conducted with great ceremony at dawn. The entire village gathered in a silent circle as Alara knelt and placed the seed pearl into the rich, dark earth. As she covered it, a collective hope seemed to settle over the square. The following morning, a miracle greeted them. A delicate, crystalline sprout had pushed through the soil, no taller than a child's finger. It was translucent, like carved quartz, and within its fragile form, a soft inner light pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, a newborn heart beating in time with the map of memories inside the hall. This tiny, vulnerable shoot was now the most public declaration of their sanctuary's purpose, a promise to the world that was now impossible to take back. The first festival of echoes transformed the sanctuary into a living, breathing storybook. Lanterns shaped like floating Ethel spires cast a gentle glow, while the air thrummed with the music of a dozen lost cultures. At the center of it all, Alara and the Guardians gathered to perform the epic of the final confrontation. They did not simply recite it. Rockin's voice became the grinding stone of the mountain. Lyra's song wove the shield of light, and Kale's shifting form illustrated the fracturing earth. They made the audience feel the weight of Boren's choice and the surge of hope that followed, not as a distant legend, but as a shared, visceral memory. The silence that fell when they finished was immediately shattered by a wave of joyous applause, and the festival was officially born. Visitors from neighboring valleys and distant towns, drawn by the rumors of a new kind of celebration, found themselves not just learning history, but dancing to its rhythms and tasting foods recreated from ancient recipes. The stories were escaping the scrolls and lodges, taking root in the wider world through laughter and shared wonder. This vibrant success, however, soon faced its first challenge. A troupe of traveling performers, masters of acrobatics and flashy spectacle, saw the captivated crowds and decided to put on their own show. They retold the story of the heart of the world, but they turned the sorcerer into a cackling villain, added a fictional romance, and gave Boren a melodramatic, drawn-out final speech. The crowd cheered, loving the exciting theatrics, but Lyra stood rigid, her feathers ruffled in offense, while Kale's sandy form vibrated with silent fury. To them, this was not entertainment, it was a desecration of a sacred truth. The purity of the memory was being sacrificed for a handful of easy applause. Alara felt the tension crackle in the air, a new kind of conflict born from their very success. She did not confront the performers with anger or accusations. Instead, as the crowd dispersed, she approached their leader, a charismatic woman named Anya, with a quiet request. She asked if they would like to see the source of the drama they so enjoyed. Leading a skeptical Anya and her troupe to the great hall, Alara stood before the map of memories. She did not lecture them. She placed her hand on the tapestry, on the very thread that held Boren's final moment, and let them feel the true, unadorned power of it, the simple, devastating resolve, the love for his people that required no grand words. She showed them how the sorcerer's true horror was not in his evil, but in his tragic, misguided belief that he was offering mercy. You have incredible skill, Alara said softly. But the greatest drama is already here, in the truth. It does not need to be invented, only revealed. Anya, her showmanship, humbled by the raw emotion emanating from the woven threads, looked from the tapestry to Alara's earnest face and slowly nodded. She and her troupe spent the rest of the festival as eager students, learning the correct histories and discovering that the real stories offered a depth of feeling their inventions could never match. The festival concluded with a sky ablaze with color. Fireworks, crafted not from gunpowder, but from condensed light memories, burst overhead. A shower of sapphire sparks held the echo of a rock's flight, and a blossoming amber flower pulsed with the warmth of a dwarven forge hearth. Watching the children's awestruck faces, their eyes reflecting the stories made manifest, Alara felt a profound and quiet peace settle over her. The festival had proven that reverence and joy were not enemies, and that the most powerful way to protect the past was to make the present fall in love with it. The echoes of lost empires were no longer silent relics. They were dancing in the night air, hand in hand with the living. The silence of meditation was broken by a new whisper on the wind. It was not a memory from the Ethel or the desert, but a faint, sharp-edged echo of vast wings and high, lonely peaks. Alara's breath caught as the impression settled within her, a surviving thread from the sky kingdoms of the rock, a people she and all the Concord believed had faded entirely from the world. The possibility shimmered before her, both thrilling and daunting. Not every lost empire was truly gone. Some had simply chosen to disappear, and their history might still be living, waiting in the clouds. This discovery sent a ripple of both hope and apprehension through the sanctuary. The prospect of finding more allies, of recovering a living piece of a history they had only known as an echo, was a powerful lure. Yet the rock were remembered in the old tales as fiercely independent, a people who had turned their backs on the earth below long ago. Reaching their hidden enclaves would mean a perilous journey into the world's most treacherous and unreachable mountains, with every likelihood of being met not with welcome, but with hostility. The guardians of the Concord were immediately divided. Lyra, the last sky singer, yearned for any connection to her ancestral people, her voice trembling with a desperate hope. Rockin, ever practical, saw only the risk, the potential to shatter their fragile peace by provoking a civilization whose power they could not measure. In the face of this debate, Alara made a choice that honored both caution and courage. They would not send a climbing party to storm the heavens. Instead, they would send a story. She worked with her young apprentice, Leo, to weave a dream message, a narrative of pure intent. It was not a plea or a demand, but a simple offering the story of the Sanctuary of Echoes, their purpose of preservation, and an open-handed invitation to join the Concord, if the rock so wished. Leo, with his extraordinary gift, cast this story into the high winds, a silent, hopeful seed carried on the air currents toward the jagged peaks. For weeks, the village watched the skies. Each day that passed without an answer felt like a gentle closing of a door they had only just found. Doubt began to creep in, and the initial excitement faded into a quiet, resigned acceptance. Perhaps the rock truly wanted nothing to do with the world below. Then, on a still morning, as a soft breeze rustled the leaves of the newly sprouted library seed, a single object drifted down into the center of the village square. It was a feather, longer than a man's arm, its veins shimmering with an iridescent sheen of gold and deep violet. It landed without a sound, a perfect, unspoken reply lying on the earth. The ascent was a vertical nightmare of screaming wind and stone that offered no mercy. Ilara, Lyra, and a small, hand-picked delegation left the safety of the foothills to climb into a realm where the air grew thin and the very clouds clung to the mountain like a shroud. They moved in a careful symphony of skill and magic. Rockin's villagers secured ropes and found holds where none seemed to exist, while Lyra whispered to the air currents, coaxing them to still their fury for just long enough to make a treacherous crossing. Ilara's own role was one of quiet guidance, her mind a repository of forgotten paths and the subtle pressure changes that signaled a safe route upward. For days they climbed, until the world below was a patchwork of green and brown, a distant memory. Then they broke through the final layer of mist and into a city of cloud. It was not built upon the mountains, but carved from the sky itself. Towers of condensed vapor, shimmering with captured light, spiraled into the heavens. Bridges of woven mist connected vast areas, and the inhabitants were magnificent, bird-like beings with eyes that held the sharp, timeless patience of hawks. These were the rock, and they watched the newcomers with a silence that felt heavier than the mountain they had just scaled. They were brought before the chieftain, a being of immense stature named Kale, whose feathers were the color of a stormy sunset. His gaze was not hostile, but profoundly wary, a deep-seated caution born from centuries of isolation. "You bring the dust of the world to our doorstep," he said, his voice the sound of wind through high crags. "Our ancestors learned that the struggles of the ground walkers are a poison. We withdrew to preserve what we were. Why should we let that history repeat itself?" His test for them was not one of strength or cleverness, but of spirit. He demanded to know the true reason they sought this alliance, challenging them to prove their intent was not another form of conquest, no matter how gentle it seemed. Ilara stepped forward, feeling the weight of every memory she carried. She did not speak of the grand purpose of the sanctuary or the noble goal of preserving history. Instead, she opened a far more vulnerable part of herself. She spoke of the crushing fear that woke her in the night, the terror that she might fail the billions of lives entrusted to her, that a single moment of her own weakness could allow an entire civilization to be lost forever. She confessed that the burden sometimes felt like it would break her, and that her courage was not the absence of fear, but the choice to carry the weight anyway. She laid bare her own humanity, her own fragility, before the stern, ancient being. A long silence followed her words. The chieftain's fierce eyes studied her, and the deep suspicion in them slowly softened into something else, a hard-won respect. "You do not come boasting of your power, but confessing your fear," he observed. "That is a truth I have not heard from the world below in 1,000 years. That is the only kind of courage that can be trusted." With his decision made, the atmosphere in the Cloud City shifted. The Rock agreed to join the Concord, their acceptance a monumental shift in the Alliance's scope. They brought with them a historical record written from the sky, a perspective that saw the slow drift of continents and the rise and fall of cities as patterns on a grand, living map. Their knowledge would fill vast gaps in the timeline, adding a breathtaking new dimension to the story of the world. As the delegation prepared for the dangerous descent, Chieftain Kale approached Alara one last time. He pressed a small, cool object into her hand. It was a whistle, carved from a single piece of bone and imbued with the essence of the mountain wind. "This will call one of ours to your side," he said, "but only once, and only in a moment of direst need. Do not waste its breath on a simple storm." It was a gift of profound trust, a tangible thread now connecting the sky to the earth. With the rock histories now part of the sanctuary's soul, the great hall felt incomplete. The map of memories, once a sprawling and beautiful tapestry, now seemed to press flat against the wall, unable to contain the soaring perspective of the Sky Kingdoms. The decision was unanimous, a challenge born of inspiration. They would weave the new lore upwards into a third dimension. The work began with threads spun from captured mist and solidified light, materials that shimmered with a delicate, stubborn will of their own. For days, the villagers and guardians labored, their hands trying to coax the cloud threads into the shape of floating Aries and spiraling towers. But the new strands refused to hold, slipping through fingers or dissolving back into vapor with a soft sigh of failure. The frustration was a tangible presence in the hall, a quiet hum of disappointment. It was Leo, watching the adults struggle, who offered a different kind of thread. He proposed they use the collective dreams of the children, the pure, stable images from their shared dream lore, to act as an anchor for the physical materials. The idea was a spark of genius. That evening, he guided the children not into a story, but into a focused, shared vision of the Cloud City, its details rendered with the vivid clarity only a child's mind can provide. As they dreamed, the weavers in the hall found the cloud threads suddenly responsive, the ethereal material wrapping around the invisible scaffold of the children's collective imagination. The great tapestry began to rise, its new sections lifting from the wall to form a breathtaking sculpture of memory that filled the air above the loom. Pearlescent spires and bridges of woven mist now floated in a silent, gentle dance, capturing the essence of the rock's legacy. The completed work was no longer a map, but a universe in miniature. At its unveiling, a profound hush fell over the assembled crowd. For a single, breathless moment, every person in the great hall felt it. Not a sound or a sight, but a gentle, warming pressure, the quiet, living weight of all the world's remembered stories resting peacefully together. This successful expansion was more than an artistic triumph. It was proof that their Concord was a living, growing entity. They were no longer just curators of a static past, but active builders, weaving a new legacy capable of embracing every future discovery. The sky above the sanctuary tore like ancient parchment. The gentle auroras and starlight were blotted out by a churning, silent storm of absolute negation, a tempest of forgetting that made the very air feel thin and brittle. It was the Void Weaver's final, desperate gambit, a direct assault on the heart of all they sought to erase. The map of memories inside the great hall shuddered, its woven threads straining as if pulled toward a great, hungry emptiness. Panic was a living thing in the village, a sharp, cold fear that threatened to unravel the community itself. Alara stood alone in the center of the square, the tiny, crystalline library seed pulsing frantically at her feet. She looked up into the descending void, and in that moment, she understood that no single story, not even the entirety of the Ethel legacy, was strong enough to stand against this. To To fight it with a shield of memory would be to create another conflict, another story of loss, so she did not fight. She opened herself completely, becoming a conduit not for defense, but for offering. She reached out with her mind and her heart, and she did not channel power. She channeled meaning. The soaring joy of the rock's first flight poured through her. The deep, resonant love of Boren's final choice echoed in her bones. She felt the patient warmth of the desert's endless story, the vibrant hope in every child's dream, and the simple, steadfast courage of Rockin and every villager who had chosen to stand as a guardian. It was not a weapon she forged, but a single, shining answer to the storm's hollow question. It was the pure, concentrated essence of what it means to remember. This brilliant tapestry of feeling, this narrative of all that made life precious, rose from her to meet the descending darkness. There was no cataclysmic explosion, no scream of conflicting energies. There was only a silent, blinding flash of understanding that washed over the world. The void weavers, creatures born of hunger for the empty and the erased, were immersed in a reality they had never known. Their endless thirst was not met with resistance, but with an overwhelming saturation. The beautiful, terrible weight of a billion remembered lives, of love and loss and hope, filled their emptiness completely. They did not shatter or vanish. They were transformed. Where there had been forms of hungry shadow, there now stood serene, luminous sentinels, their presence a soft, respectful quiet. The hunger for oblivion was gone, replaced by a profound reverence for the stories themselves. They had become the guardians of silence, their purpose now to honor and preserve the necessary quiet between tales, the sacred space where one story ends and the next can begin. The storm was gone. A deep, peaceful stillness settled over the sanctuary, and for the first time, the silence felt like a blessing. That gentle, endless rhythm of remembrance now beats at the very center of the world. The village, once a quiet hamlet, has become the heart from which all stories flow, a living, breathing entity that learns and grows with each new voice added to its chorus. Ilara, her own life now interwoven with countless others, watches this flourishing not as a keeper of a sacred flame, but as a gardener tending to an endless, blooming field. The weight she once carried has transformed into a profound understanding that history is not a burden to be shouldered alone, but a gift that only gains meaning when passed from one open hand to another. The concord of echoes thrives, its strength no longer in the power of its original guardians, but in the diversity of its members. New storytellers rise with each turning season, each bringing their own unique perspective to the ancient tales. A villager who once farmed the land might now teach the children how the Ethel's agricultural wisdom can be applied to their own fields. A weaver from a distant town might share how the patterns of the desert glass cities inspire her own art. The lost empires are not merely remembered, they are continuously reimagined, their lessons and innovations woven into the fabric of daily life, solving modern problems with ancient ingenuity. This legacy is no longer a lullaby to soothe children into sleep, but a vibrant collection of waking dreams that stir their souls. The stories of sacrifice, courage, and creativity do not tell them what the world was, but show them what it can be. They are blueprints for building a better future, drawn from the collective wisdom of the entire human experience. The world feels safer, its foundations strengthened by the roots of these remembered lives, yet the work is never truly finished. For every story told, another waits to be discovered, and for every child who listens, a new chapter is waiting to be written. This is the final, beautiful truth Ilara learned. The purpose of preserving the past is not to live within it, but to ensure that every future has a past worth building upon. A gentle, endless rhythm, as natural and vital as the turning of a page in a well-loved book.